Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this year's Fort Collins Book Fest. My name is Rochelle Raymer, and I work at the Colorado State University Libraries in the Research Support and Community Engagement Division. Before we get started, I'd like to recognize a few of our festival sponsors. This book fest is being produced by the Poudre River Valley Public Library District. Our presenting sponsors are Old Firehouse Books, the Colorado State University Libraries, and the CSU English Department. Further support has been provided by Colorado Creative Industries, Poudre River Friends of the Library, Poudre Library Trust, Colorado Humanities, Fort Range Community College, and Liggett Johnson and Goodman. And our amazing media partners, KUNC and 105.5 The Colorado Sound. Thank you so much to all of them. A couple of housekeeping notes. Please use the Q&A function rather than the chat function to ask questions of our panelists. This just helps us track the questions more easily. You are welcome to type your questions in at any time during the session, though we'll save most audience questions for the end of the panel. Let's get our session started. I'd first like to introduce Sarah Henning. Sarah Henning is the author of several books for young adults, including the Indies Introduce, Indies Next Selection, and Junior Library Guild Gold Standard Selection Sea Witch, and its sequel, Sea Witch Rising. The Princess Will Save You, The Queen Will Betray You, and The King Will Kill You, as well as Throw Like a Girl, and its companion book, It's All in How You Fall. Her first middle grade book, Monster Camp, is scheduled to release in summer 2023, and she appears in the Girls in Sports anthology Out of Our League. When not writing, she runs ultramarathons, hits the playground with her 2 kids, and hangs out with her husband, Justin, who doubles as her long-suffering IT department. Sarah lives in Lawrence, Kansas, hometown of Langston Hughes, William S. Burroughs, and a really good basketball team. Next, I'd like to introduce Vanessa Rasanen. Vanessa writes new adult fantasy romance filled with sassy attitudes, relatable characters, and slow burn. She loves a good cliffhanger, judges books by their covers, and wishes she could write faster. Her books include a smidge of salty language, a bit of blood, and a serving of swoon-worthy, sometimes spicy romance. She lives in the pretty in its own way part of Wyoming with her pilot husband and 4 kids. When she's not writing, you can find her mixing up a gin and tonic, rewatching New Girl, and running her small business. And finally, I'd like to introduce today's moderator, JC Pillard. JC is a writer and editor living in Colorado. She has an MA in English literature with a focus on 18th and 19th century Gothic from the University of Colorado at Boulder. JC's short fiction and poetry have appeared in several publications, including Metamorphosis, Electric Speck, and In the Wake of the Kraken, as well as having the cover story in Broadswords and Blasters, Volume 11. And she loves reading and writing fantasy. Let's turn it over to Julia to start today's session.
Thank you so much, Rochelle. Metamorphosis is an impossibly difficult title to say. Welcome everybody to the panel. We're so excited to have you here. I'm so pleased to be talking with these 2 authors today. We're going to be talking about fantasy, romance, how those 2 things mix together, and then what their writing journey has been like. So I'm going to start with a discussion of their books and their most recent publications. So Sarah, you have several new books coming out, but your most recent series is The Princess Will Save You. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, Rochelle, I'm so sorry you had to say all those titles. And like my titles get progressively longer, like it was a joke for a while because they kept getting longer, like 2 words, 3 words, 4 words, like in order. It was kind of funny. And then it went backwards. Anyway, I'm talking about the Princess Will Save You books, which is a completed trilogy. It completed last August, which is so nice when you want to read, right? Like you can read through all of them. So I'm really happy that they're all in the world. And they do have like successively terrible titles. Like you're like, what is happening here? This is terrible. But what they are, they're basically a gingerbread Princess Bride. Like they're an ode to the Princess Bride. They're not necessarily retelling or inspired by. I wanted to take sort of the damsel in distress trope and flip it on its head. And so in this case, I have a sort of warrior princess who is father dies. And when he does, she has to marry to ascend her throne, which she thinks is total BS because she's 16 and it's stupid. And so she is very stubborn about it, literally asks over her dad's dead body, like, can we not do this? And in retaliation, her best friend and maybe true love is stolen away, and she decides that instead of being blackmailed, she'll go get him. So they're really fun. As you can see, my two characters, Amarante and Luca, are on the covers of every single book, so you know that they make it to the end. Just the king will kill you. But otherwise, I can't really talk about them without spoiling them too bad. But they are my most romantic fantasy series, so they are probably perfect for this panel.
Yeah, that is great. We do have those books at the Poudre River Library, although the first one you can't get because I have it. I promise to return it when I'm done. That's great. I have so enjoyed digging in that scene where you described where she demands her freedom over her father's body. I was like, what a flex. It was delightful.
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
I did. I was like, man, she's gutsy. She's a great gutsy heroine.
She was very fun to write.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Vanessa, if I can call you forward. So Vanessa, your I think maybe most recent book is On These Black Sands, which I also have. I'll bring it forward. She's like, I'll hold up my copy too. Can you tell us a little bit about On These Black Sands?
So the first one actually came out in 2021. The second one came out last summer, and the third one, so it should be completed this year, is with my beta readers right now and goes to my editor next month. So I'm almost done with it, almost. So this actually, people like to know where I got the idea because it's pirates and fantasy and romance, and it was really a pub crawl in the Bahamas. And we went to a pirate pub, and they were talking about these women who would dress as men to be on pirate ships. And I thought that would be a really great idea. And so I sat and I thought, and it actually went through many iterations and different stories. But really, this is about, it's a land ruled by women and under the guise of peace. So there are no weapons, no nothing. And they use the pirates. They have a treaty with the pirates, and the pirates provide security. Well, the heir, Aoife, is my main character, and she's an heir and discovers that that is not actually true and decides to run. And the only way off the island is a pirate ship. And she has only met one other pirate who happens to be the love interest. So it is, I don't say it's an enemies to lovers because that is a little bit misleading. It's a hate to love. But yeah, it's kind of her journey into finding herself. She is not your typical fantasy heroine. So right now we're used to getting those kind of badass women. And she's, yeah, like that one. So she's different, but she's strong in a different way. So she's quieter, and her strength comes in the way she is willing to stand up to things that scare her and do things that are terrifying. But people she's awkward. She has anxiety. So there's anxiety rep in this. And she's kind of having to overcome all of that and relearn the entire world. So there are fae, there's a kraken in book 2, and there's a lot of magic and death. And yeah, it was a lot of fun to write. But you can get these at Firehouse, by the way.
Yes, folks, please check the chat. We have links dropped to both of these authors' books. And if you are local in Fort Collins, Old Firehouse Books in downtown has these books in stock. Highly recommend. They're both really fun. Vanessa, I've been enjoying your book. I'm not very far, and I was relieved to hear you say the main character's name out loud. Now I've totally forgotten how to pronounce it. So
it's Aoife.
Aoife, okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sort of intrigued. Both of you have talked about, you have these these female main characters who it sounds like are a little bit on opposite ends of the spectrum. I'd love if you could talk a little bit about how you came to those characters and like how the characters serve the particular stories they're in. Why don't you start, Vanessa, and we'll go to Sarah after that.
So me, I have wonderful anxiety. And I tend to stick my foot in my mouth a lot. I'm very awkward, and I don't see a lot of characters with those features that are, you know, the main character. They're usually the side character that's there for comedic relief. And I wanted to write for those readers who want to see a relatable heroine that is them, that isn't great at everything the moment she picks it up. She struggles a lot with what to say, what to do, but she keeps going. And she has this emotional resilience that is just, I've loved writing it. And I get a lot of great response from readers saying, you know, it felt very, very relatable to them, that it was them on the doing this. And so that was what I really sought out to do.
For me, you know, because I was engaging with the damsel in distress trope and I wanted to flip it, I wanted to make sure that if my, you know, with my heroine, who is now the one who's helping out the damsel, would necessarily have the opportunities that male characters have when they are chasing after a damsel. So I built this very hyper patriarchal world, and my princess Amarande is literally the most powerful woman in it, and she can't get what she wants. She can't do anything without getting married, and she is terrified she's going to end up marrying the person who she believes killed her father. They think it was a heart attack, but she believes otherwise. Plus she's 16. Like, who wants to make decisions like that when you're 16? You're already like reeling from loss and asked to do this big thing. And now you just, you know, you have to make these other choices. So I thought that if I was going to engage with that trope, I couldn't give Amarande the easy way out and make it, you know, this sort of matriarchal society. And, you know, fantasy is so good at taking our world's problems and kind of stretching them out and making them sort of interesting, so that if you squint at them, then there's sort of like a funhouse mirror effect in our world. So, you know, I think hopefully when girls read this, they're going to, you know, like they will identify with Amarande, even though they're not princesses of some vassal kingdom in a fantasy world chasing after their true love on a horseback. So that was sort of where that all came from, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think it's always interesting, I feel, to see how a slots into a story, because the two things work together. It's interesting to see how they fit together like puzzle pieces. Along those lines, you have both written many characters. What has been your favorite character to either write in the voice of or to write about? Sarah, why don't you take it away?
Well, if we're talking about these books, it is an ensemble cast. And I'm the type of writer who typically likes to meet my characters on the page. I don't go in with a bunch of character sheets and plug and play. It's sort of like my subconscious tells me who I need at the time, and I meet them. And so when I was setting this up, though, because it was sort of inspired by The Princess Bride, I knew I wanted to have 3 pirates. So I was trying to figure out who my pirates were just before we met them. And my son, who's now 14, like came over and was like, "What are you doing?" Because I was on a baby name website, and he got a little nervous, I think. And I was like, "Oh, I'm naming these pirates. I'm looking for cool names." And my world is not Anglican. It's based on the Iberian Peninsula because I studied abroad in Spain. So I was looking at Basque and Catalan names. And he was like, "Oh, why can't one of the pirates be a girl?" And I was like, "Oh my God." And so I wrote this girl, Ula, who is a really good, she's not a foil necessarily, but she's another sort of badass girl, but she is sort of broken. She's an orphan. She has some secrets, and she does different things for the plot and for the characters than Amarande. And she was so much fun to write. And honestly, this was supposed to be a duology. And I was literally like in the middle of writing the second book, and the pandemic hit, and then my editor got laid off. And I was like, "But I need more. I need to write more. Like, I can't fit it all." And so we ended up getting a third book, like at the last second. And I was like, okay, if I have this third book, I'm going to give Ula her scene. And so she has a scene in the third book that I have readers who are really looking forward to it. And I was like, I'm writing the heck out of this scene. It's very romantic, actually. Because the third book is actually, rather than the central romance, the other romances kind of come in because I was able to do it. And so I love writing her. She was so much fun, and she knew exactly what she was going to say every time she popped in my head. And I wish I could just bottle that and have that like every time, you know?
Okay, is it my turn?
Yeah, Vanessa,
I
go
never know
ahead.
if I'm supposed
I
to
should
jump
just
in
say,
or
and
not.
Vanessa.
And Vanessa. So my favorite is actually my main, sorry, I just hit my table. My main male character. He's very broody, kind of conflicted, you know, trying to shut off part of himself that he doesn't want to admit is there. And actually there are several parts of himself that he's trying to avoid. But he's very complex, and we see him, especially, people like to know who he was inspired by. He was actually inspired by 3 fictional characters. So people love to hear that he was inspired by Dean Winchester from Supernatural, Killian Jones, obviously from Once Upon a Time, but also Tommy Shelby from Peaky Blinders, which if you are a Peaky Blinders fan, you know Tommy Shelby is kind of that expert at disassociating, putting that mask on and hiding what he's feeling in order to get the job done. And so that was kind of the part that I've gotten to write in book 3. And it was just so much fun to see him wrestle with this and have to pretend certain things so that people wouldn't know what was happening with him. And he's just really, really snarky and fun. And yeah, but this is a multi POV. There are so many characters. So yeah.
That's awesome. You said Killian Jones, and Rochelle was nodding emphatically, and I too was like, oh yes, Killian Jones. I remember Killian Jones. So Sarah, you talked a little bit about getting your editor laid off, which sounds very stressful.
Oh, the pandemic.
It just really threw the publishing industry for a loop. And I would actually love to turn our attention in that direction. Both of you have published multiple books, and your publishing journeys, I think, have sort of created this interesting world for both of you. So I'll start over with Vanessa. I'm going to just switch back and forth. Can both of you talk a little bit about what your publishing journey has been like, and then what led you to become writers in the first place? Like, what was the first spark where you were like, I think I want to do this?
I wish I could say why I'm a writer. Everyone is always like, oh, but I have to get these stories out. I don't know why. It is something I have to do, and I don't know why. And I am not like full of ideas. Like, I'm actually worried that I'm going to run out of ideas and not know what I'm going to write next. But for publishing, so I'm independent publishing, self-publishing, I guess, if you want to say it. And that was, I did so much research when I decided to go that route. And it was really, you have to have this entrepreneurial spirit. I can't say that word, so if I screwed it up, just bear with me. It is so much work, and having to start your own business and run your own business and hire everybody who works for you. But I love it. I love getting to pick the editor that I work with, or the designers and the cartographers and my audiobook narrators. It is just so much fun to have that kind of production mentality. I actually did consider for about 5 minutes querying this series, and then my impatient side got the better of me. And I had been teasing it on social media for a while, so a lot of people knew I was writing it on Instagram, and I was like, you know what, I want to get this to you guys faster. Except I'm a very slow publisher in the indie world, so I do one a year, which is almost unheard of. Most people try to do multiples. But yeah, that was really, it's not for everybody. Like, you just really have to want to run your own business, but I absolutely love it.
It sounds like a ton of work, but just looking at your book, it super paid off. I was admiring the map. So
thank you.
Yeah, it's beautiful. We're gonna have to talk about who your cartographer is.
I will let you know.
Thank you. Sarah, can you tell us a little bit about why you became a writer, what your publishing journey has been like?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I am jealous of the map because I wrote a quest book and they didn't have the money for the map because I spent all the money on the cover. Um, and so by the third book, I hired somebody and made a map and gave it away as like a pre-order incentive because I was like, I need a map. So I'm quite jealous, Vanessa. So I did always want to be a writer. I was one of those kids that would draw a bunch of things on, construction paper and then like staple them together and they were a book like before I could write. But so I'm very practical. And so by the time I was a teenager, I was like, oh, I need a place like I can go every day, like a job and be paid. And like I like structure. So I was like, I'll be a journalist. So I became a journalist. I actually became a sports journalist, which if you noticed in my like long rambling titles that Rochelle read, I have 2 sports books and then a sports anthology because I was a sports journalist for 10 years. And I love writing sports into books, especially girls actually doing the sports and sports on page instead of just like a means to make a hot boy character, which happens quite often. But I could never quite escape the fact that I really wanted to write books. Like I just, even though I wrote every day and I was an editor, so I was a copy editor, and then I became a reporter. So I almost did it backwards. But I just couldn't get away from the fact I wanted to write books. And so after my son was born, I was like, okay, I'm going to give this another try because I had written some books so when you work in sports, you work second shift. So I would go to work at like 4:30 in the afternoon, and then all the sports happen and they finish like at 11 o'clock at night, and then you're editing the stories. So I would write in the mornings. But I never kind of got anywhere. That was when like you still had to like send the manuscript like in the mail, just like with the self-addressed stamped envelope. Like it was totally weird. I'm so glad we have email now. But so I was like, okay, I'm gonna give this another go. And so I got my first agent actually writing adult mystery of all things in 2013. And and I had a really hard time. So when you get an agent and you're on sub, so JC, you need to know this because that will be your world soon. It's not just the editor making the decision, it's the entire team. So for me, editors always loved my books, but marketing was like, what do we do with this? Because I sort of rode the line between women's fiction and crime. And they were like, what do we do? And so I was on maternity leave with my daughter, who's now 8. And I was like, all right, I cannot write another mystery right now. Like, I'm just going to write some YA. Like, I didn't tell my agent. I loved reading YA. I was just like, I'm just going to try this. Like, I really like these stories. And I ended up writing my debut, Sea Witch, and we sold it 4 months later on proposal. But then it took 3 years for it to come out because traditional publishing is slow and you get in line basically. And so by the time I sold it, my editor was already booked up until 2018. And so that's sort of how it started for me. And I do think my background in journalism helps quite a bit, but you don't necessarily need a background in anything. I think, to write, you can, be a mathematics professor and write a novel. Like you don't have to have studied English or been a journalist, but I do think it does help me on the editing side. I'm not very precious about things. I'm very good at deadlines. And, I think that sort of, businessy side isn't with every author. So I really try to make sure to make my editors' lives easy and my agent's life easy because we would all like to be successful. So that's sort of how it's gone for me. I did go full-time writing during the pandemic when I had both kids at home for virtual school. And it's weird because I never really expected that I would get to this point where I'd be able to do it. And so I feel very, very fortunate because I think a lot of traditional authors and a lot of indie authors have full-time jobs outside of writing. So I'm going to enjoy this little basking moment and just writing, which is always what I wanted to do.
That's awesome. It is both lovely and terrifying to hear that your book sold in 4 months and then you had to wait 3 years. Yep. But at least it came out. Yeah.
Yeah.
So let us turn our attention. This panel is Legends in Love. We've talked a little bit about the books. We've talked a little bit about the characters. Let's talk a little bit about the genre. So over the past, I guess 10-ish years was what I was ballparking, but it's probably been going way back. There's been sort of this growing subgenre of romance fantasy that these two genres get blended together. I think Vanessa referred to it as romantasy when we were communicating back and forth, and I was like, oh, that's that Instagram term that I've been seeing. So I was wondering if you guys could talk a little bit about romantasy, what defines it as a genre, and then what defines it for you as writers. Why don't we start with you, Sarah?
Well, I was thinking about this question, and I think for me, the idea is that, there's always sort of this subplot of romance typically in big epic fantasies. But when that subplot becomes more than a subplot and is actually like integral to the main plot, and, you layer in all the emotion that's involved in a love story with an epic fantasy. That's how I would characterize it, I guess. Vanessa, what do you think?
So to me, there are two different types, right? So we have romantic fantasy, where those would be where the subplot is a little bit more, but maybe the romance doesn't have to fit certain romance tropes. To me, fantasy romance, you have to follow those romance rules. So you have to have a happily ever after or a happily for now. You can't have cheating. That is a big no-no. So you have to know what romance readers are going to expect. So it's kind of mixing that fantasy world and that epic fantasy, like she said, with those romance rules. I forgot what I was going to say.
And there are rules to romance. I think it's really good that you brought that up, because like romance readers are different than women's fiction readers. They expect something like certain beats in particular, and you cannot mess with that, or you have to call it something else.
It's true. And I actually read a friend's book recently, and it ended with a not happily for now. And I said, wait a minute. And she goes, no, this is romantic fantasy. It is not fantasy romance. And I was like, well, dang, you just pulled one over on me because I didn't know. But yeah, you definitely have to get those. I had a reviewer, actually, one of my ARC readers, she endorsed the second book, and she said, your books are like romance books in like a pirate fantasy, like wrapping paper. So I like to think that I'm writing romance stories, but in these fantasy worlds with these fantasy elements added in. And I think it works really well because romance readers and hopeless romantics like I am, we live in this kind of like wonder, like we love this wonder and fairy tales and everything. And it just melds so nicely that I just love it.
I'm delighted. I have only recently started reading romantasy, as it were, and was just so pleased to find the genre that sort of blended these two things together. But Vanessa brought up something that I think about a lot. So tropes in everyone's laughing, tropes in books and in films sometimes get a bad rap, and it's usually because I feel like people are equating them with cliches. Which is when a trope becomes so overused that it no longer packs a punch anymore. But as writers, tropes are necessary things that we need to tell a story. So everyone who's watching, just know if there's a trope, we're not doing it to irritate you. It's there as a writing tool. I would love to hear, first of all, what are your takes on tropes? Am I wrong? Are tropes bad, actually? And then what are some of your favorite tropes, both in fantasy and romance and romantasy? Vanessa, do you want to take us away?
Yeah, so this is actually a bit of contention on TikTok right now. So Book Talk, there are some people on there who say, all these authors just talk about their tropes and that's all they use to market their books. And we say, yeah, because it works. Especially if you're working in romance land, romance readers love their tropes. I don't know about other genres because I don't write other genres, but romance readers want to know what romance tropes you have in there so that they can avoid it if they don't like it, or they'll go and learn more. I've had people pick up the book just because of the tropes I've said are in there. So I think they're really, really good. The other thing is you have to know your tropes because they have rules. So if you're going to have a trope, you need to know how readers are going to expect it to go in order to have it. That's why I said, like earlier, I can't call it an enemies to lovers because they're not trying to kill each other. And that's what people
are they
will
rivals
expect.
to lovers? Rivals to lovers is one of my favorite tropes, and it gets
I
confused
actually
with
should hear
enemies to
that.
lovers because they're not the same thing.
See, and I haven't heard that. So I'm going to have to start using that because usually they say, oh, it's hate to love. So they're annoyed with each other and they just don't like each other. But to go into what my favorite tropes are, one bed or the popular like alternative to that is one horse, which I
did one horse.
actually writing. Yes, I love the one horse trope. It is coming in my next, I'm writing a standalone right now. And so I have that planned. Slow burn is considered a trope. I don't know. I mean, people love to say it's a trope. I think it's just
I think
how
it's
it
a way
works.
to describe a love story. And
Yeah.
you know, today's readers, sometimes they get frustrated with slow burn, so they want to know,
Mm.
you know.
But I also love insta love, which is a very hated trope.
It is.
People really don't like it. And I took a risk and put it in my book too, to try and prove that it could be done well. And that you could prove that like readers would latch onto those characters, even though they kind of had this instantaneous bond. So I don't know. I did have some people who still hated it. So
Well, I think when you write teenagers, that I mean, because I write teenagers, like insta love is a thing for teenagers. Like it's a literal thing that happens to them. And so I think it's silly to excuse it, you know, like I just do. Like meet cutes are meet cutes for a reason.
So Sarah, do you like the sort of love at first sight insta love trope in
Of
your
course. I mean, I like, you know, I mean, and I love pining. I wrote 3 books on pining, basically. I did write a slow burn, see, which is a slow burn, and like, and I did have readers go, oh, you know, like, because the romance isn't right there in your face until like later, and then you know, but that anticipation is the reason that people love it, you know, that like building. And I think, you know, maybe in movies they get away with things a little bit differently because it's like 2 hours no matter what you do. And so, you know, if you pick up a book and you're hoping for like an in your face like romance or like the actual beats of like a romance story, you might get frustrated by a slow burn. But it also might just be just something that like you need to interrogate within yourself, like, hey, this is really enjoyable, and like it for what it is. One of the worst parts about being an author is that a lot of people don't understand that maybe something's not for them, but that doesn't mean it's not good. And it's kind of hard as a creator because, you know, anybody can say anything about whatever you write. And somebody will really love it and somebody won't, and you will never write anything that'll make everybody happy. So I've noticed a lot of my writer friends, like basically because they just want to have fun at this point in their careers, like picking tropes or situations that they have always wanted to write and just throwing them all in one book and just having a great time, like a fabulous time. And I think that's a really interesting idea. Like I've never thought of a book that way, but now I'm like, I really should just like think about like, what are the things I have not gotten to write that I would really like to, and just throw it into a book.
Yeah, put it all in one pot and stir and see what comes out.
Seriously, you know, like, and you know, and it works really well. Like one of my favorite romanticities of the past year was The Undertaking of Heart and Mercy by Megan Bannon, which was sold basically by her publisher on tropes. Like the whole back of her arc is like every trope in the book. And it worked really well. And she's a good friend of mine. She wrote it during the first year of the pandemic. It was like literally like, I'm going to sit in my basement and write this while my kids do virtual school. I'm going to do what makes me happy. And then she's done really well for herself doing that. And I'm like, that is a good way to think about this. And tropes too, like, so I played with the damsel in distress trope, right? And when you were interrogating a trope and flipping it on its head, you really have to think about how other people use that trope. So I picked that trope, but it's something that's been used for 1,000 years. You know, there's a reason. It almost has a beginning, middle, end. It has a built-in love interest, usually. You know, somebody who is doing the saving always ends up falling in love with the thing that they save, the person that they save. So there's a reason that trope has endured, but then you also have to look at the ways that that can be problematic. And Alana K. Arnold did that very well in her book Damsel, and other authors have done it as well. But you have to kind of know what else is out there and how people might interact with your trope if you're using it. Same thing doing a retelling or something that's inspired by, because you have to understand that the reader is going to go in with their understanding of The Princess Bride. Or I wrote Sea Witch, which is based on Hans Christian Andersen's Little Mermaid, not Disney's Little Mermaid. And so, but most of the people reading it will have interacted probably with the Disney version instead. So you just have to make some decisions and be okay with however it comes out, if you're going to use a trope.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm now wondering how many people were caught off guard by the presence of sea foam. I haven't read this book, but I have read Hans Christian Andersen's Little Mermaid. So I'm like, oh, that probably spoiler alert for the people watching.
Yeah.
I'm interested to sort of, you guys have talked about a range of different romance tropes. Some of them are more spicy than others. There's Only One Bed, for example, can get quite spicy. I'm sort of wondering, like, what do you guys think there? I think there has been sort of a broadening of the range of spice in romantasy in recent years. I imagine, Sarah, it's a little bit different when you're writing YA versus
Yes,
writing
I was going to
critical.
say, I feel really uncomfortable talking about teen books being spicy. Although
Yeah.
I do think, the trend that you're talking about really started with Sarah J. Maas, who was categorized as YA initially, is now categorized as an adult, and her adult readers who start talking about things being spicy. Right. The teens that read my book, I don't think they talk about it being spicy.
It doesn't belong in YA, in my opinion.
No, I mean, the sex, of course, is part of relationships and is in YA books and always will be, but it's sort of like a little like weird when adults are like, that YA book was really spicy, this is my book boyfriend, and I'm like, he's 15, or whatever. So this is probably a better question for Vanessa writing in the new adult space.
So what we're seeing with new adult, because I have a lot of author friends who are saying, oh, I want to do new adult because my characters are all in their early 20s, but it's not spicy. And I said, write it anyway. Write it as new adult, because it's never going to change if no one ever writes it. And so you're seeing a lot more funding, as you said, in that new adult and adult category and they're not necessarily clean. So some people will say, oh, so it's a clean
that's on the other end of the spectrum. I don't really like when people label things clean either. No. It's like, and so sex isn't dirty.
I have a friend who's true, and a no spice gothic retelling of Pride and Prejudice coming out soon, and she gets really frustrated because when she says it's no spice, people come into her comments and they're like, oh yay, a clean sweet romance. She's like, what about gothic did you not understand? Like, these are dark themes, there's violence and there's a lot of tension, but you have everything from like borderline erotica down to fade to black, like just tension only. I am towing this line. My book 3 gets spicy just because that's where the characters went. It took 3 books for them to get there. And trying to find, I think that's the biggest struggle as a romance writer, is knowing where are you comfortable writing and where is your husband comfortable with you writing? I mean, that's is what it is. And knowing when to pull back and when to kind of give a little and let your characters run. But you definitely have the whole spectrum. And so it gets really hard to market though, because what one person thinks is spicy, another one thinks is tame. And especially with my trilogy right now, the first 2 books are very tame. And so I never wanted people to think that it was going to remain tame. And I know I have a lot of clean readers who loved the first 2 books. And so for the 3rd book, I'm actually putting a table of spice in the back, so they will know what chapter. So if they want to be well aware ahead of time that this is going to be a spice that has a chapter with intimacy in it, they can know ahead of time. And what's funny is my spicy readers were like, ooh, now I'll know exactly which chapters to go reread.
Skip ahead.
Yeah, they're like, I'll just tab those right now. So it works. And actually people really like responded to that.
You should call it the spice rack, truly. Like, just
perfect.
That is good.
That's great.
Okay, now I'm going to have to put you in the acknowledgements because I need to make a note of that.
You're welcome.
That's fantastic.
Thank you.
I think that's such a good idea though, Vanessa. I have seen romance books where I'll be reading along and I'll be caught off guard. And I love the idea of sort of presenting people with the information up front, so that they can, I guess, tailor their own experience a little bit more and not be caught off guard.
And I wanted to put it in the back in case someone didn't want to know. But it's kind of like a trigger warning of a different sort. So yeah, because I know a lot of people, they want to know, okay, I'm going to skim through this chapter. I'm just so that they're not caught off guard, because I think that is what upsets a lot of readers if they don't know, is that kind of surprise factor.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I am looking forward to your spice rack. Can't wait. So just a reminder to our watchers, we are coming up on the Q&A session. I have a couple more questions, but if you have questions for these authors about their books or their writing process, please drop them in the Q&A. The chat is not live, so take a look at the Q&A, drop your questions in there, and we will get to those in just a little bit. So both of you have talked a great deal about your books, your characters, writing romance, writing somewhat spicy romance. I want to talk about the central thing in all of those, which is writing. So writing, when I was a kid, I used to think that writing was this magical thing where the author sat down and the words just flowed and they didn't stop until the story was done. Now I'm a writer and I know better. And I expect you both do as well. So I wanted to ask you about your writing process, what that looks like, what your favorite part is, and what things are your must-haves. Like, do you have a candle that you always have to light when you're writing, or it's like, I must have my cup of tea? Vanessa, what is your writing process like?
Oh man, I don't have any must-haves other than I tend to move around my house. So I have my laptop. I have a really nice office downstairs that's like got lots of art and everything up, and I rarely write down there. That's typically where I edit. Music is a huge thing. So playlists, I find readers love to know what songs kind of inspired you as you wrote. I am a very clean drafter. So this is why I set aside like 6 months to write that first draft. And I know some people are like, I kick out a draft in a month, and I don't understand. Because I kind of, I have to sit with those characters and with the story in my head a lot before I ever put my fingers to the keyboard. And so I read this really good book called Dear Writer, You Need to Quit. I highly recommend it. And she talks about questioning the premise. And one of the premises she says we should question is you can't edit a blank page, because she said, can't you? And I realized that's what I do. I'm editing it in my head before I ever get to the keyboard. So my favorite part is actually editing that first, once I get after the first draft and I go back through myself before it goes to my editor. It's just the massage process. It's making sure everything is working, tweaking those words, adding those scenes, fleshing out the scenes more, cutting out things that don't work or that you don't want to take the time to make work. And that's just my favorite, is seeing that come together. And actually marveling at how many of the words from the first draft remain. Because I typically, when I'm drafting, I think, ugh, this is awful. And I actually put notes in, like, reword this is crap. And then when I go back through, I'm like, actually, that's not so bad.
Yeah, I can actually remember hearing Neil Gaiman talk about that very thing, where he's like, you can't tell the good days from the bad days, like when you go back and you reread the manuscript, which is extremely comforting on the bad days. Sarah, what's your writing process like?
Well, mine has changed during the pandemic. Before, when I had a full-time job, I would get up at 4:15 and I'd run and I'd listen to a playlist based on whatever I was working on. And then I'd get home, grab my coffee and sit down and write until my kids like wouldn't allow me to, or 7 o'clock, whatever came first. And then I would like kind of bottle it all up and work a lot on the weekends. And now it's so funny because I think my subconscious did a lot of work during the week. And then on the weekends when I would write, it would really flow. And now that I write full time every day, like, it's so funny because my subconscious is always like chugging to like catch up. So my writing process feels much different. You know, I can write 5,000 words in a day. I don't like to, but I can. I would much rather write like 1,500, you know, and kind of move at that pace. But if I have to, I can write fast. I've had to occasionally to crash books through. But I decided to keep sort of that early rise and running and thinking about what I'm going to do for the day, because it is my only like silence, because I became like the default parent. I take my kids to school and I do all these other things. And then I end up with this really segmented day that's based on the school schedule. And my husband works from home too. So we're constantly trying to avoid each other. So when I'm feeling very creative or I'm drafting, I try to get all the way away from him. Because even though he's not loud or anything, just having somebody else around, it like feels weird. I didn't realize how much my writing process entailed me going to our green juice place and sitting there, this cafe, and just sitting there and writing, because I just needed to get away from everybody. That definitely affected my writing process quite a bit. So my typical day is to get up, run, think about it, and then get my kids to school, and then I write for a couple of hours before lunch, and then I will usually take the dog for a walk or lift weights, and then write again. And I will sit like in the middle school pickup line, just finishing what I'm working on, and come back. And for me, my favorite part is actually the drafting. However, when you start doing books for other people, that changes a little bit, because as I kind of mentioned, I've had to crash through books. I have deadlines. I don't necessarily get to work at the pace I want to. I used to be a very clean first drafter like Vanessa, because Sea Witch, my debut, I actually wrote the majority of that on an exercise bike, because I couldn't run at the time, on the notes app on my phone. And instead of copying it straight into my document every weekend, I would type it in and then edit it as I went. So when I finished it, which took about 10 to 12 weeks for that first draft, it was very clean. It still went through a lot of editing, but it was a different process than what I have today. And actually, sometimes when I get stuck, I will get on that exercise bike and I will like thumb tap stuff out, because it just, I don't know, there's something about being like really focused and not being able to do anything else. Is really great for me. But because I've been writing for other people now and writing fast and maybe not being necessarily happy with what I have to turn in because of when I have to turn it in, I'm really loving the idea of like getting to the point where I can fix it. So like making it all the way through, and then, you know, keeping a list of all the things I want to change and then fixing it. I turned in a book in January, which is a YA like contemporary fantasy that I can't talk about, but hopefully we'll be able to soon, and because it will come out in summer of 2024, whether I can talk about it or not. But I literally like sent that to my editor with like a giant list of like all the things I want to change, and just so that she would have in her head like, I know this is not perfect, I know this needs help, can you look at these areas of the story and like focus your edits on that. And you know, I think that we are partners, you know, and that's kind of a good way to maybe push things forward instead of turning and being like, it's perfect, enjoy, you know. The back end editing has definitely become something that I have spent a lot more time on. And like Vanessa, I do move around, but also when I'm editing, I'll move my whole desk setup. Like I have a standing desk, and I find that like if I'm really editing, I get an external monitor and I sit down and like have it just like right in front of me really big. And that kind of changes my brain.
She said the school pickup line, I take my laptop and I scoot my seat all the way back so I can have my laptop there. And it's like I can get 1,000 words out just sitting in that line, and it's amazing. Now I don't have I feel like as an indie author, I don't have that opportunity to like write all day long. And I'm a full-time author, but there's like, I spend so much time marketing and actually I'm looking for a PA. I have a few people who are trying to like vie for the position because I need help. Like I need someone who can make graphics for marketing because it's all on me. And so like half of my day is being on social media or running my Amazon ads. And then the other half is writing and trying to squeeze in as much. And what's funny is people say, oh, it's so great that you got to quit your job. I bet you write so much more. And I said, I actually think I write less, because back when I was working, I used to be a data analyst. So I have a degree in engineering. So you were right when you said, you know, you don't have to have the background in English. I used to write at 4 a.m. and I would have to get as much as I could done in that set amount of time. And now it's like my brain has said, oh, you have all this time. And so it just like kind of shuts down. And yeah, it's great.
Well, I have a new thing to try, which is writing in the car, which I've never tried. So
Not
next
while
time,
driving.
not while driving. I understand. I won't do it while I'm driving. So we are close to wrapping up here. We have a couple audience questions, which I would love to share with you. We'll see how many we can get through. So this one is specifically for Sarah. What drew you to writing for young adult rather than for adult?
Well, so I talked about how I got my first agent writing adult. But I always loved to read young adult. I just, I thought I was a really boring teenager, like extremely boring. Like I was at home by like 9 o'clock and all my friends would like do the fun party things after I left because I knew it would make me really uncomfortable. So I was like, I am not cool enough to write young adult. Basically was like my mindset. And my husband's like, you have a great voice. You can write young adult. I'm like, I don't know. And so like, I just put it off forever. Like I loved reading it, but I like just thought like, I'm not creative enough. It's nah. Which is funny since I was writing like terrible murder mysteries, like where like, I mean, terrible as in like the murders are terrible. And so but I found I really love writing for teenagers. And, I know that like the majority of my audience are adults who came during the Sarah J. Maas like crossover for, adults reading YA, but I just adore when I actually get to do events and talk to real life teenagers who like to read. I always felt like I was so busy I didn't get to read for fun when I was in high school, and it didn't really happen again until like after college. And it's such an interesting time in your life when you are growing and changing and trying to figure out who you are. And it's really fun to explore that as a writer, even when you were 41 years old. And I have a 14-year-old, he's completely embarrassed, but also really proud of the fact that I write YA. So all of his friends will read my books. He has not read them. And you know what, if like he doesn't want to read my kissing scenes, I get that. So I really do enjoy writing for kids, but also like writing my first middle grade was another sort of transformative experience, writing a character who's 11. Because that is, a time when you're not necessarily coming into your own, but you're starting to question things for the first time and like question your parents, maybe lied to them for the first time, like in a big way. And so there's sort of a different sort of finding yourself aspect to writing middle grade that's really fun. So I guess maybe I'm a kid at heart, and boring kids need books too.
As a fellow boring kid, I really relate to that. So I have a question for you, Vanessa, from our audience. Do you have any sort of insights into the differences in your experience writing on these Black Sands versus Until the Stars Fall?
Yeah, so they know what my next book is.
Okay.
So Until the Stars Fall is the first standalone in a collection of standalone retellings. And so it is different in that I kind of have that framework, right? It's a retelling of the 1954 movie Sabrina, except with fae princes and, death and magic and everything. And so for On These Black Sands, I had tried to plot it and couldn't. It was like there were so many things that could happen that it just kind of froze me. And so I ended up having to be kind of a plantser, where I would plan out like the next 3 chapters and write those and then kind of do it in chunks. Whereas for this one, I'm actually increasing my speed. So I'm trying to put out 2 books a year. And so I'm trying to write a book while I'm launching the last one. And it's a little bit of a challenge, but it requires me to outline it. And so I have every scene is outlined for this. And it's actually been so much fun to get to write a retelling because it's a story I really love. And I found it's actually easier. And I actually asked my team today, my beta readers, it's like, is it a bad thing that when I write, I'm no longer saying, ugh, this sucks. Like I'm actually being like, ooh, that's good. And I don't know if that's like a bad sign because I don't know. It's interesting because this is my, let's see, 5th book that I've written. And so it is definitely different. There's a lot more confidence that comes from it, right, Sarah? Like once you've gotten through several books.
Yeah, I mean, yes and no. Like once you know how the
Yeah, no,
sausage
it's
is
never
made,
easy.
then you sit there and you go, oh no, is this happening too fast?
Yeah.
Have I introduced too many things? Blah, blah, blah. Like you've got this little voice in the back of your head. Like the book I was working on in the fall, I was like, everything has to happen faster. Like I could hear my agent and my editor going faster, faster, faster. I'm like, oh God, got to get to this faster. But like I understand why, like it really is like it's sausage is made and then suddenly like the blinders are off and you're like, oh gosh, I know exactly how this has to go, and so it is easier but also harder.
Yeah, there's comfort in knowing like, okay, I've done this before, I can do it again.
Yes.
But I think new authors and aspiring authors, people who are just writing their first book, I think it's really comforting for them to know that it never really gets easy. Like there's always different challenges.
Like it's like
exactly.
Kids. Like if you have kids, it's like
yes.
you think
yes.
you have
Or
everything
kids,
figured out and then they change it.
Exactly. See, and speaking of kids, like my 13-year-old, I was just telling him about the second standalone because we just started planning that. And he goes, Mom, that sounds good. I want to read it. And I said, you can't because you're 13 and it's not appropriate. And so he read On These Black Sands, but he's a binge reader. And so he's like, okay, well, now I can't read book 2 until I'm like married because I'm not going to be able to read book 3. So he's kind of put it off. But yeah, he's actually my 6-year-old is like my big fan. And he tries to like sell my books to his teachers. And he's like, Mom, like I told my teacher that she should get this book, but I told her I'm not allowed to read it because it's inappropriate. I was like, oh, great. Like
you always need a good pitch person. I feel like that's a great pitch. I feel like Ernest's 6-year-old pitch is like exactly what you do. We actually have a writer question here. This is I think a writer who is starting to look at sharing her work. She says, what was it like to have people start reading your work at first? I have my mom. I know she's not going to be upset with anything I write, but still the thought of having her read my stories scares me a little bit.
I mean, I think best is starting with an exchange, trying to figure out if this, if a beta reader, like Vanessa was saying, like, I mean, there's beta readers, there's alpha readers who are reading like as you go. Beta readers usually read the whole thing once it's been edited. Critique partners would be where you do exchange. But in any case, I think it is helpful to maybe start with one chapter, not only because it makes you feel better, like you haven't given away the store and like you feel less anxiety about it, but also to see if that person is a right match, because there can be matches that go south, or somebody can give you advice that is not the best for your writing, or it comes from like a guy in my MFA place. If you know who like guy in my MFA is, it's like a Twitter thing where it not all critique is like helpful. And you don't really know if a person's going to be a great match until you get in there. So it's, find somebody who is interested in what you're writing, but also, be a little skeptical is what I would say. How about you, Vanessa?
I am a weird one, and I have to tell myself, don't share it with everybody because it's not ready. I like that instant feedback. Especially while I'm drafting, I like to know I'm on the right page, like on the right track with the characters. I always tell people, because the question I usually get is beta readers, like, who do you pick? How do you know who to pick? And I say, it's okay to pick friends as long as you know they're not going to lie to you and just want to make you happy. You want people who read the genre, want you to succeed, but aren't going to like sugarcoat everything. You also don't want someone who's going to be really mean to you either. But eventually you have to get comfortable with it, though, with someone reading. So definitely like stick with one person, not your mom. and see how it
Moms
goes.
are good too, though. My
They
mom
are
might
good.
be on this call. We gotta.
No, that moms are fine.
They're great.
But yeah, I have certain friends where I will send them the chapter for different types of feedback. So I know one friend will look at this way, and then another friend is good at looking at a different part of it. So I tend to use alpha readers, beta readers, ARC readers. It gets a lot of feedback before it goes out. So it's very nerve-wracking though for everybody. I just had a friend she's working on her like 10th book, and she was like, can I send this to you? And I really don't like, she wanted to run away and hide, which it was perfect. So I don't know.
I mean, that's fair. I want to run away and hide anytime anyone has to look at my work. So we are coming to a close. Thank you to Sarah and Vanessa for a truly excellent conversation. I have learned some things. I will now pass it back to Rochelle, who will close out our session. Thank you to everyone who came. I'm sorry we didn't get all your questions, but again, you can find their books at our local library, or you can go to Firehouse Books and pick up their books from there.
Yes, thank you so much, Vanessa and Sarah. That was really excellent. I enjoyed listening to that so much. And thank you so much, Julia, for moderating and for your really excellent questions. Thank you to all of you who attended. We happy to see you guys engaging with this. And of course, thank you again to all of our sponsors who helped with this session. If you would like to purchase any of the authors' books, there are links in the chat for each of the authors, or you can go to the Old Firehouse Books website. All of their books are available for purchase there. That wraps up our Legends and Love session. This is just the beginning of a month of author talks, panels, readings, workshops, and literary fun. Make sure to pick up an event schedule before you leave, or find the schedule on our website at focobookfest.org. That's FoCoBookfest.org. Thanks again.